A Balkan Journey by Chris Leslie. 30 by 24 centimetres hardback, 200 pages, limited edition, caseboard foiled cloth cover. It's got a nice texture to it. That's the back. Now, I'll just jump into the first. This is the contents page. It's quite an informative book. So here's the contents. There's the main story structure with chapters, and at the back there is a sort of picture, captions, image, thumbnails to give you more of an insight into the image and where it was and who it was. There is a series of different essays by John McDougall. The book structure, it follows Chris's journey when he arrived in Croatia right through to the epilogue, and it charts his time and his engagement with the different community, with photography and with the political climate in Sarajevo. Each essay is translated into Bosnian. So what I like about this book is it's not a book about a photographer creating a photo book. It's about a young man who initially started observing the Balkans crisis from the TV in the 90s, developed a fascination for it, went on to study it academic level. And then when he finished that, he really felt the need that he wanted to go and see it, to help, to be part of it, to witness it, to get a feel of it. And that's what this book's about. It's actually a book about transition. It's a book about Chris's transition as a photographer, as a human, as an NGO, wrapped up in the transition of Croatia. And he used photography as a means to getting out there to work for the NGO, to help to work on the rebuild around 95, 96. It's almost his diary of infatuation and his education and his love and bond with Croatia and its redevelopment. This is the first shot he took, which is a shot of Tito's statue surrounded by barbed wire in a destroyed military barracks. You can see bullet holes in the walls and stuff like that. So the journey begins. So this is the beginning of the story in 96 in a place called Pakrak. And one thing which Chris said when he turned up in Pakrak, it was very different to the picture postcard images he'd seen of Croatia. It was very much a downtrodden, war-ravaged, destroyed, both the community and the buildings, community and town. Now what's interesting, as you can see, this white marks and these almost like abrasions and holes in the shop. Now, I think from this journey, he took something like 15 rolls of film, and a lot of them were damaged. I think there was only 8 survived, but he didn't throw them away. And this is what I love about this book. It's a sort of subconscious collection over the years, which is put aside. He's documented his whole journey right through to 2017. I think without even thinking about it being a book, without thinking about it being anything, he just was documenting his time, because when he turned up in Pakrak, he'd sort of lied about getting there, and he wanted a job in an NGO in Croatia. So he filled in some forms and told them he was a photographer. He got the job and he had to go and teach himself black and white photography. He managed to scrape a camera together, and the camera actually is in later on, but I'll show you. He got a camera, and basically he turned up with a phrase book, a 35mm guide to photography. He'd done some courses in black and white photography, and he turned up and he set about working in an NGO. And what he did around the town, he was working, helping, doing odd jobs and stuff like that, and helping repair stuff and just integrating with the community. But he also set up his photography workshops with the young kids there. So his obsession with Croatia had landed him there. And I would presume Pakrak was a bit of a shock to him. It was the western part of the front lines. And it was basically, I think it was once 80% destroyed. I guess he was subconsciously documenting, which is history now, something which is not there anymore. He was documenting the remnants of the war. And obviously 25 years later, when he finished the book, it was no longer there, effectively. It was all either modernized, rebuilt, restructured, redesigned. Now this shot here is a shot of a guy who was a volunteer with Chris, a guy called Ivan. I think this is a shot of him sitting out the window, obviously, but I think he was a very troubled man, Ivan. What I know about the story behind him is that he died. I think Ivan struggled with the enormity of what they had to do, with the pressures of being in Pakrak and what he had to do, and he found it too much. Now, I'm not too sure, and I'm not an authority on this. What I suggest you do is get in touch with Chris if you've got any questions. I'm sure you'll have some dialogue. And you can also put some comments down in the comments part of the YouTube channel. Ask some questions and see if Chris answers, and let him get a, you know, if there's anything you want to find out about anybody in the book, or what he was going through when he was there and how he saw change, please ask some questions. Back up. This is a lady called Crazy Luba. She'd spent the whole of the war in this flat, and she was right in between the Serbs and the Croatian troops. She would go to her living room window and shout at the Serbs to stop the war, to stop the fighting, and then she would run to her bedroom window and shout at the Croatian soldiers to tell them to stop fighting and stop the war. And I think, and obviously the war would take a massive toll on people's mental health, and maybe Crazy Luba seems a bit unfair, to be honest. Now, this here, I think, Kids with Cameras, I think that's the title of some of the workshops Chris did, where he got the local kids involved to get them to document each other and themselves and their surroundings. And integrated within this book is pictures of the kids, pictures of them, and a now and then section as well about some of the kids he did in Sarajevo and how they are now and where they are now, which is quite interesting. And I just think he was obviously not aiming to be a documentary photographer. He was just naturally observing the environment. And because he then was a photographer when he was there, because he was teaching photography, I think it was just a natural progression that he was finding out about it. And what I like about it is that it's not somebody who's gone with a purpose to take pictures, to document history. It sort of almost happened by accident. He forced it upon himself and accidentally documented an important piece of history. And this lady here, now I think she's called Luba as well. She lived with 3 cats, 6 chickens, and a dog called Johnny. There's Johnny. And she would feed all the animals with NGO corned beef. And there's a real beauty to this. There's some gorgeous pictures. And you can see now he's creeping into colour. I'm not sure if this was later on when he went back and how he's just incorporated into the narrative of this lady. But I think when his time finished there, he went back and stayed with her for a bit and helped her and looked after her. It's almost become her son, in a sense. Now, here we go to the Sarajevo camera kids. Now, I don't know if you can see that. There's people out there. That's the significance of the landscape, really, isn't it? Dereliction, destruction, and machine gun holes. Amazing. Now, this is Oggy Tomic, who says, photography was a way for me to stay out of trouble and express myself in the way institutional life in the orphanage never allowed. And this was 1998. So these are the camera kids of Sarajevo. So he's putting something back, he's doing something with the kids, and that's what this book is about. I just like the fact that he's a sort of photographer by accident. I love the fact that he just used it as an excuse to go out there. But then it sort of developed his life, it developed his world. It sort of took on a new chapter in his life. Very slowly, because he mixed a lot of his travels to Croatia with NGO work. I think he travelled the world as an NGO. And I think he got his calling into photography very slowly, by accident. This is amazing. I love this window frame. He's really into his framing, in terms of frames within frames. I love it. It's really good. And this is Sarajevo, 1998 to 2003. Again, it's just 3 or 4 years on, 5 years on, and there's still that destruction, isn't there? Tito. Gorgeous. Beautiful portraits. This is Una. What you were getting in the late 90s and early 2000s was the new generation of teenagers coming through who can't even remember the war, who were born just before, just around the time or just after the war started and ended. And they have no part of the war apart from that they were born there. So this new generation is still trying to figure it out. They're still living in the remnants of war and destruction. And people like Una is part of that. And you've got a new way of thinking now, a new generation. And this book digs into that a little bit. Again, we've got the frame there. Look at that. Some nice stuff. I like this sort of abstract frame within a frame. There's a cat. Some really nice portraits. This is a lady called Zahida. I think was called Nana. Her husband was killed by a sniper in 1992, and then her son was killed by a shell a year later. And it's interesting that she's smiling, and the pain and the hurt that's within this woman. One can only begin to imagine the pain this woman has faced. And it's interesting that she almost looks at peace with a war she never wanted and the loss of a family she never wanted. And this was in 2003. So now we're moving into colour with this rather lovely shot. Now the new front line was rebuilding, infrastructure and repairing. And this was in the 2000s. There was a very slow process in the transition of the rebuild and the reconstruction of Croatia because of a lot of factors, politics, corruption, and I guess to some degree post-traumatic stress with a lot of people, and still people feeling paranoid, unable to move on. And like I said, I'm not a authority in this, and you can read some of the insight into this essay by John. And there's a development, and you know what's a significant thing about this has gone as well? I reckon this is digital, and you can see the progression and the style of his work, from black and white, quiet, desolate, stark imagery, to a more complex compositional approach to the colour work. There's a, what's that? Again, he's got his frames. Scratch that. Look at that. These are great. And this is called 25 Years of Peace. Journey Objects. So this is a map of the battlefront in Bosnia and Croatia in 1994. This is his Serbo-Croatian phrases and useful words book, which he took in the 90s. That's his Kodak pocket guide to 35mm photography. Film camera. And this is him. I think when he turned up there, some local businessman or something gave the volunteers all bikes. And there was about half a dozen of these volunteers. I think that Ivan was, who was at the window, the guy who was looking out from the window, and a few others from different parts of the world, all congregated in Pakrak. And there's the Canon, I think, which he borrowed off a family friend. And I like this. This is, in fact, this is one of his contact sheets. What's interesting about this contact sheet is that he was obviously very early days within his photography, but there's one significant thing which I quite like about this, is that you can always tell how a photographer views stuff and his focus and the way he looks at stuff, and if his eye is trying to understand the subject. And contact sheets were the old way of really trying to work out how a photographer works. And actually, if this is his early stuff, it's quite interesting. You can see that that was a one-off shot, and then he's come in close, but he's actually tried to work on a picture of her close up. Sometimes you just get these lucky shots. I'm not saying it's lucky, but sometimes you don't realize that you've got something, and sometimes it just works like that. You can see here, he's trying to find the right framing and the right composition of the shot. He's worked on about 3 there, and he found it. He's sort of gone in on that angle and then moved close up and then readjusted himself and gone in. And again, here, he's tried, so he's observed and tried to capture something he was seeing. And yeah, you know, that's, I think later on, as he progressed, he'd probably, and what happens later on when you become much more experienced, you maybe would spend longer here, so your contact sheet would be double up, and you'd have maybe 12 shots of this, and maybe you'd have 12 shots of that, so your contact sheets become taken up with less, if that makes any sense. And that's roughly the progression of your eye and your mind trying to get the right work, and you work the subject and you work the composition. I hope that makes sense. Obviously now, in a sense, you don't really sort of look back and see that with digital. But as a photographer trying to investigate stuff and trying to look at stuff, you do need to work what you're focusing on and what you're trying to compose. You can't always just snap, snap, snap. And that's what contact sheets were amazing for. You could sit back later and really try and really sort of see how you were working the subject or working the thing you were focusing on. This is a map he purchased of Sarajevo. I guess it's 2015. This is the rebirth of Sarajevo. That's beautiful, isn't it? Look at that. What a shot. So different to the type of shots he was doing in the 90s. 20 years later, you can see he's found his calling. He's making complex compositions, complex exposures. Really good. What a shot that is. It's wonderful. And again, another essay by John. And you can see that sort of cosmopolitan European city of Sarajevo as life goes on. You have to see beyond and dimensionalize your photographs, and that, as simple as it is, that's what it's doing. Now the nightlife and bustling community of Sarajevo. This is a guy called Kerem. He's a 20-year-old Bosnian student. He's sort of talking about he blamed the media and the politicians for keeping the war back of everybody's minds, and said that the people of Bosnia really just accepted every kind of injustice from the government. I guess there's a lot of angry youth there. There's definitely, the youth are asking questions, and that's good. He would have just been born when Chris first turned up in Pakrak. And even this is quite interesting. And I think I thought about this shot a bit, and it sort of made me think, I wondered why he put this in, but now I get it. And it's really significant, this picture. And when I looked at it before from a distance, when I first opened the book, I sort of ignored it because it was just seemed like a colour abstract shot of art. It speaks volumes for new Croatia. It's a sort of metaphor, I guess, for painting over the past, because the walls are still potted with bullet holes and shrapnel holes, whereas there's some abstract modern painting has just gone over it. There's no sort of hiding the past, and I think it's really significant shot, really clever, nicely thought out, and sneaky because it caught me out. This is Sarah, another 20-year-old in 2015, who would have been born around 95. And Sarah is one of them new, and Sarah is that youth. We're all people, we're all from one country, we speak the same language, and I look forward to making friendships with my people. And if that's the new beginning and that's the new way, then that's amazing, and that's how it should be. I think this was shot just outside of Sarajevo in a military installation or somewhere just outside. And I think it's nice that Chris is focused on a lot of things in it. It's a very quiet but poignant and significant and noisy book, done very quietly. The transition of a country from war to a place where people are just trying to get on and move on, put what's behind them in the past and look at new beginnings. I think this is an organic goat farm. Now, what's significant, I think, about this is that they are working, I think they might be Croat, and they're working with a Bosnian Serb who I think is this guy. I might be wrong. And even he's a very clever shot, because the quote with this picture is that the best thing about the peace agreement, which was the Dayton peace agreement in 1995, is that he said, I could finally throw away my gun. Wow. Now I think these guys and these guys are working together. I may be totally wrong. Beautiful. It's really beautiful in the winter, isn't it? Now, let's just run a couple. The graves. Use of the old words. The city rebuild. The camera kids 20 years on. Chris set up 2 camera clubs. I think he set up one obviously set one up in Pakrak when he first went, and then he moved When he eventually went to Sarajevo, he set up the camera kids in Sarajevo. And this is, I think it's a really clever touch and a lovely touch that what he's done in this, I'll find it, is that here he's revisited some of the kids out of the kids camera club and photographed them in the same place and find out where they were and who they are and what they're doing now. I think that's quite interesting. But I'm going to go back to this shot. This is a picture about tourism. It's a picture about normality of life, a transition from war to people having leisure time now. Well, what's significant about this shot, I think this was where the 1984 Winter Olympics was. But also I think this is Sniper Alley. Now I may be wrong, but I'm sure this is where all the snipers were. And look at that, it's just like perfect place, isn't it? So this is a very poignant shot for me and a very understated shot. It's a very clever shot. But what this sort of shot makes you do is, on the surface you might look at it, like I've done with some of the shots, that you might think, it's a cable car. But with this sort of book, it's asking you to just do a bit of research. Don't skim through it. Read some of the essays. Look at some of the history. And you'll see how clever shots like that are, or how important shots like this are. Again, you've got tourism. And I think what these pictures here are now showing the religious integration again, the multiculturalism of Sarajevo tourism. It's the perversity of tourism, but a country survives or needs to survive off tourism. And I think he's tapped away at all the important bits quite nicely. And again, when he was doing it, I don't think he wasn't aiming to make a book. He wasn't there as a photographer as such. He was there because of his curiosity and his obsession with wanting to do something. I think there's Nita, excuse my pronunciation. This is her back in 97, I think she was 11. Now she's 33. Look at the difference in style. Look at it. It's just fantastic. What a way to see how your photography's changed. She was an orphan, and now she is a physics teacher and a professor in computers and maths. And again, this is another lady who's Desnenta, who, this was the government buildings, I think, the parliament buildings. Same shot, 20 years on. And again, just the same guys, the same sort of format, 20 years on. Look at that. I think it's such a good shot. It's such a good shot. And back end, his buildings. I think, hats off to Chris for doing this, and it's a massive part of his life, a massive part of his education. And what a way to sort of reflect on your past. There's one of his frames again. He likes his frames. Frame within a frame. But I do like them. They're very nice. Like almost a picture on the wall, isn't it? I don't know much about that shot. But I guess, again, there's always a subculture within a culture. Look at that modern Sarajevo. Now, what I like about this is that this epilogue is about Tito's bunker. And I think he's done a cracking job here. And it's a sort of end of the journey. and the contrast of what was going on and what Tito would have done had there been a nuclear bomb or whatever had gone off. I'm not really sure. Look at that. Now I think this is a museum and an art gallery. That's Tito's bedroom, and that's great. And I think that this shot is an interesting way to end the book. An empty corridor with Tito's picture right at the end. And here we go with the image captions, acknowledgements. And I'll take you back to the first shot. I think this is an amazing journey. I think you can learn from something like this. Things you're doing now in 20 years might be really important. I think it's really important to document and take note and educate yourself on stuff. Stop trying to see things for an end that have an end. You don't do things because you're interested and you want to investigate. This is a very clever book. Pick up a copy of this. You can still get them on Chris's website. Get it and learn more and read the essays. Get involved and learn from it. Thank you, Chris. I really like this. Well done. Please support and subscribe and share the channel and these videos, and let's just help keep photography projects and people's hard work alive and well. Thank you. Be safe. Thanks, Chris.
We are floored, we are bound down, see us, careless corpse, see us, steal the dawn, we are stone. We are stone. See us born, see us wind down, see us fly